So in my last video, I talked about, I explained why I had been binge watching the videos of Tim Woodford. I believe that's his name. And one thing he likes to say a lot is we should never embrace the idea that guitars, and I'll extend this to instruments in general because I'm holding a Skylark ukulele here. We should not embrace the idea that instruments are disposable, that we buy them and we dispose of them and buy new ones, much like we do many other household products. I find myself agreeing with this, and this is the philosophy behind a lot of videos on this channel. When people ask me, why do you waste your time with lesser brands, unknown brands, unbranded guitars, guitars in the $50 to $200 range? Why don't you just get the good stuff? Well, I do have some good stuff, and I've done videos along the way, all the vintage brands that the purists like. However, I find that with a good setup and with sometimes upgrades of parts and some, attention to detail, a lot of lesser brands, a lot of budget instruments can be made into really good guitars. Sometimes that's just tweaking, sometimes it's rather obsessive. And I realize that there's a balance that you have to be aware of as to whether something's worth it. If I take one of these Harley Benton guitars, or one of these IYV guitars that I paid $200 for, and I put $50 or $75 worth of parts and upgrades into it, I still think I'm going to get an instrument that's well worth the amalgam price that I've paid. But there are some boundaries that let's say that possibly are not logical to cross. I'm holding in my hands here a Skylark ukulele. Yes, it is Skylark, and I got this on my 3rd birthday. It was my very first introduction to the world of music, and it was in a terrible state. Somehow I've managed to hold on to it all these years, and it was in a terrible state. And I was working at a violin shop many years ago, and I took this ukulele and I glued it all back up, and I refinished it. It's got a shellac finish on it now, a sort of French polished. I retained the fiction pegs. I think I cut a new ebony nut for it. And I hung it on the wall. Why? Because it's sentimental. It is the oldest possession that I have that goes back to my childhood, and it was sort of the launch pad for all my current interests. If I hadn't have got this ukulele on my 3rd birthday, I don't know, what I'd be shooting videos of now. So to me, it's worth it. I spent probably 4 or 5 hours putting this back together, refinishing, doing the work on it. It does play. It's not in tune right now. It does play. It's still rough, but I just put it on the wall as a reminder, because to me, it's a worthwhile nostalgic piece. It has sentimental value, and you can't dismiss that for people. For you, taking a Skylark ukulele circa the late 60s and putting that much work into it is probably not feasible. It's not logical. The price of the work that you're doing exceeds the repair by far. So a lot of people just wouldn't do it. This would be tossed out. This would be disposable firewood, if you like. And this sort of brings me around to my point. If you have the ability to fix something that has some sort of value, whether it be nostalgic or sentimental value, and you have the wherewithal to do that, it's worth it. And nobody can tell you it's not worth it. That has to be a decision that you make for yourself. if you don't do repair work and you have an old instrument, a family heirloom, and your repairman tells you it's going to be $2,000 to restore, but it's only worth $500, you are forgiven for bypassing that repair and saying to yourself, well, it simply isn't worth it. I'm going to put it on my wall and enjoy it as a aesthetic piece, or I'm just going to sell it as is, and somebody else can take on the project. Maybe somebody who has the means to do it, who doesn't have to pay somebody else to do it. None of those things are wrong, but even the maxim that one man's trash is somebody's treasure plays a part here, because instruments that you might consider irreparable and not worth restoring, somebody else might take that and practice on it, practice repair work on it, or fix it up so it's playable for a kid. This ukulele here, when tuned up, needs a little bit more work because it's been hanging on my wall and it's got a bit of fret sprout. But it could be, a first ukulele for a 3-year-old again. So a lot of instruments, people like to say, "Oh, that's junk." There are very few instruments in my experience that are absolute junk. There is always some value, even in the worst instruments, even in the terribly made eBay instruments that do seem disposable because they're so poorly made. You can usually scavenge something off them, or you can with a bit of work you can turn them into serviceable instruments, maybe for a first-time learner. You don't want to give it to them as is because they're so hard to play and they'll just quit. But if you can make them playable, sometimes you can find a home for them. Or you can, use the parts. Even like if you have a guitar that's completely trashed, you can take the top wood and cut it into cleats for future repairs. And a lot of luthiers do this. They recycle parts of the guitar. You can take ebony parts off. If you've got an ebony bridge, it'll make an ebony nut somewhere on a guitar. Sometimes you can scavenge the pegs or tuners and reuse them. Very little in the world of instruments is absolute trash. And we should sort of move away from this idea that these are disposable commodities that we buy, we use, we throw away, we throw into a landfill, and then we buy again. These are full of resources, full of wood, and often can make some kind of platform for some aesthetic value. I often get people coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you have a junk guitar for a stage prop? I'm doing a play and I just need something that looks like a guitar." Or somebody will make a lamp out of an old trashed guitar or a violin or something like that. So let's get away from this disposable thing and learn to value each and every instrument for what it can do and what it can give you. See you next time.